So for our audience, Senator Markey, we're very, very honored to welcome here today with his very busy schedule in Washington. And he is, of course, the senator from Massachusetts and the chair of the Senate Climate Change Task Force. Ed Markey has been a leader on climate and the environment for his entire career in public service, and 36 years representing Massachusetts in the House, 8 years in the Senate. He has authored the landmark Waxman-Markey American Clean Energy and Security Act in 2009, the only comprehensive climate change bill to pass a chamber of Congress. He has been a leader in this area, and I've known Senator Markey and his, of course, wonderful wife, Dr. Susan Blumenthal, a leading physician and public health expert for many, many years. And it's a real honor to welcome you to RockCreek, Senator, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Afi.
So first question is, you've been very involved in the conversations with the White House on the bipartisan infrastructure deal. Where does that stand today?
Well, today we're going to have a key vote on the floor of the United States Senate, and that will be to begin the debate on the bipartisan bill that is still being negotiated between Democrats and Republicans. And that's a bill on infrastructure, which is big and it's important, but it really doesn't include the significant climate change-related provisions that are in the second bill, which is a $3.5 trillion piece of legislation, which is inside of the budget resolution, which Senator Schumer wants to have voted upon before we leave for our August break. So there's two key bills, one important but more traditional infrastructure. That's 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans who are more moderate are negotiating that. And then this larger $3.5 trillion bill, which most likely will not draw any Republican support at all and will have to be passed just with 50 Democrats and Kamala Harris, Vice President, breaking the tie on that issue. So that's where we are right now. And right now we're scheduled later on today to cast the first key vote, and that would be on that bipartisan package.
Senator, you've worked with a lot of young people. The young people in America are very, very excited. In fact, they vote, through Robinhood and others for sustainable finance and sustainable investments. You also have worked on this topic for a long time, and it seems like the industry and the private sector also, and shareholders, are also very much behind sustainability efforts. Why is it so hard to bring the two sides together on something that seems sensible and something that will get the economy to grow so much faster?
Well, back in 2009, when I was the co-author with Henry Waxman of the Waxman-Markey bill, that was ultimately a multi-trillion-dollar bill. It passed the House of Representatives, but it died in the Senate. That would have reduced greenhouse gases by 80% by the year 2050. But we didn't have a movement, and that's what we needed. So that's what has happened across the country now. Young people on campuses, in high schools all across the country have risen up, and the intense interest in climate change is now at an historic high. So I think that on the infrastructure parts of this legislation, I think Democrats and Republicans agree, and I think we can do something big, and the bipartisan bill is a part of that. That's $1.2, $1.3 trillion, mostly in traditional infrastructure. And then there's another $3.5 trillion in the other bill, the budget resolution, the reconciliation package, however you want to describe it. But it's really the climate and family plan that President Biden has. So from my perspective, we are going to come together on the infrastructure, the pure infrastructure, roads, bridges, part of it. But on the other side, I'm afraid that we're not going to. But I think we still have an excellent chance of getting the 51 votes we need to pass it and put it on President Biden's desk.
That will be very exciting. Secretary Kerry, I think as recently as yesterday, warned that Beijing has to act or there will be climate chaos. Do you hope this new infrastructure, again, once it's enacted, will communicate to the world that America is in the right place on infrastructure and that, in fact, will be leading rather than lagging?
You cannot preach temperance from a bar stool.
Right.
You can't tell China and India and Brazil, you should stop polluting,
right,
while we just continue merrily along. And that's what happened with 4 years of Donald Trump. He just sent the wrong signal. He was a climate denier. He lived in the White House, and the rest of the world just said, well, the United States is not going to lead. They're going to be the laggards. And so that kind of was a permission slip to other countries. So that's why our legislation that we're going to be debating over the next several weeks is so important, because that puts on the table the commitments which the United States are going to make at Glasgow later on this year when President Biden goes there, and it will give Secretary Kerry, Climate Envoy Kerry, the ability to say to countries around the world, no, this is real. This is what we're going to do for wind, for solar, for all-electric vehicles, for plug-in hybrids, for battery storage technologies, for transmission, for the agriculture, industrial, and commercial sectors in our country, tax and regulatory changes that are going to significantly advance our ability to meet our dramatic goals of reducing carbon in our own economy, while simultaneously creating millions of new jobs. So I think China is put on notice, and inside of the bill as well, there is a border adjustment tax, so that if China wants to keep taking advantage of their pollution generated electricity in order to make products, then there'll be a border adjustment tax that will be imposed. And that will be true for any country in the world. And that's just saying to China, we're serious about this. We're not going to play Uncle Sucker.
Right.
We're not going to have high standards and then allow you to keep low standards and sell those products into our economy. So we're going to be giving all of those tools to President Biden and to John Kerry so that they can then have tough negotiations with the Chinese.
This is really important because the marginal growth in pollution is coming from other countries, not the US. So if you don't stop it, as you said, at the border, if you don't put on these kinds of taxes or come up with some other format, we will continue to add to greenhouse gases.
Yeah, we really don't have a choice. We have to bring the whole world together. There has to be a global compact. But without China, no real solution is possible. And that's why it's important for the United States and Europeans to come together. The Europeans are now imposing a much tougher standard moving forward. We're poised in the United States to do so if we can get this legislation passed. And then working in conjunction, the US and the EU, I think that's a very powerful voice to be speaking to China especially, but to India and other countries as well.
Coming back into the United States, you've been always very involved in how do also these laws get implemented. You are interested not just in getting the law passed, but also how do we implement them. So moving forward, how do you see the role of private sector and private sector, public and private, working closer together in partnership, particularly in climate finance?
Well, from my perspective, obviously, the goal that we have, we'll see, if we can get it all done, but it's to have a 10-year tax break for clean energy technologies. And then that just sends the signal out to the private sector. Here are the tax breaks for clean energy technologies, for vehicle technologies. We don't know whether it's hydrogen. We don't know what the technology is going to be. You just go and do it.
Right.
Okay? But the break will be there. The same thing will be true for a climate bank, a climate accelerator, where we'll have that financing and we can make it available to private sector. We can make it available to cities, to towns, to public housing authorities at low interest so that clean energy, energy efficiency technologies can be invested in, but to draw the private capital. The goal, of course, would be for every public dollar that we are putting up, that 7 or 8 dollars in private money would also then go into projects. There are right now maybe a dozen clean energy banks, climate banks across the country. They're also around the world, so we're using those as the models, but then to scale it up. President Biden put $27 billion into his proposal for a clean energy accelerator, a climate accelerator. We're going to try hard to make sure we can match that in the budget bill that we ultimately pass.
So you tried to apply the same thing in Massachusetts in particular, and you've been a proponent of wind energy and other kinds of renewable energy. But at the same time, as you're moving towards climate friendly investments, you're looking, I think, at climate justice very carefully. So some of these seem to be projects that will create a lot of new jobs. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, just last Friday, I was in New Bedford with Senator Elizabeth Warren and myself, but with Gina McCarthy, who is
she'll be here in a little while.
Who is President Biden's climate czar, and so we basically signed the deal between the building trades, organized labor in Massachusetts, and the wind industry to build the first 800 megawatt facility. The first industrial scale offshore wind facility in the United States. The goal over the next 10 years is 30,000 megawatts, which could create upwards of 30,000 jobs at a minimum in our country. And again, the tax breaks, however, are very important. I was able with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse to include a 5-year 30% tax break for offshore wind in December of 2020. So for the next 5 years, that's guaranteed to be on the books as an incentive to industry. And as part of this deal with labor, we're also saying, look to the communities that are always disadvantaged, always left behind. The minority communities, those that live in environmentally challenged communities, hire those people. Give them the training, make them the apprentices. And with Congresswoman Cori Bush from Missouri introduced legislation for environmental justice mapping. So if you can't solve a problem if you don't map it. So we're going to include the funding that we do a map of the United States, of those communities that historically have been most adversely impacted by environmental issues, and then make sure we prioritize them. President Biden has said that 40% of the funding in his legislation will go to those communities. And so it's very, very important for us to rectify historic injustices, but also bring in workers from those communities to give them the training so that they can have the jobs of the 21st century, jobs that will turn into careers. So that's the intentional goals which we've set up to make sure that equity is at the core of any bill that we put on President Biden's desk.
That will be so important, but also what we've been seeing here at RockCreek is in places like Georgia, in places like Denmark, all over the world really. As you said, these, for example, wind projects can create so many new jobs, but also help land that was blighted from all kinds of disasters and give new jobs. But the training part is not just straightforward, right? I mean, training people to move, whether it's from the coal industry to wind or from other jobs. To wind or solar or other renewable jobs will involve training. And do you see there's enough budget put by the government to cover that?
Yeah, we're going to be very intentional here to say that we understand that for the coal industry, for example, this is going to have an impact upon them. The more that we deploy wind and solar, the more that we deploy other renewables, of course, there's going to be a reduction in the need for fossil fuels. So we have to say to those workers, no, unemployment benefits, healthcare benefits, job training benefits, and try to place as many of the new facilities in those states as well. So those workers have proximity to where the new jobs are going to be created. So we need a plan. But at the same time, if we don't move, China will. And we're just going to lose all these economic opportunities. That's the bottom line. So if China has a plan and we don't have a plan, China will win. If we have a plan, if we unleash the best of the United States, we will win. But simultaneously, we have to say to the workers who are going to be negatively impacted, we have a plan for you as well. We're not going to leave you behind. We're going to give you a transition, a bridge to this new economy. And wherever you are, we're going to try our best to make sure that the resources are there to help you.
You mentioned China. China, as we sit here, is still exporting coal power plants to emerging markets that could be using, obviously, renewable energy or, at worst, natural gas, which is cleaner than coal. Is there anything we can do about that through whether it is our multilateral institutions or other institutions that can help move countries towards cleaner energy?
Absolutely. What China is doing is they're dismantling their old coal-burning plants and then moving them, for example, to Africa, and then reassembling them there. So they're essentially selling their old coal jalopies to other countries and using that as a kind of a way of building goodwill. But that just has to end, and that has to be negotiated in Glasgow. This just has to stop. We cannot allow for the Chinese to continue that policy, and that has to be on the table as something which is non-negotiable. If we're going to be dealing with these countries around the world, we have to be saying, whether the United States, China, or any other country, we're going to help to finance the new energy technologies of the 21st century, the solar, the wind that's indigenous, the geothermal that's indigenous to your country.
And going back to Glasgow, are you confident that what you talked about earlier will be in a position when we go into Glasgow to have the agreements beforehand so we can have that authority in the meeting?
I'm very optimistic. Again, we have to get the 50 votes of all Democrats, and so we have to negotiate with Joe Manchin and other Democrats to get all of the votes we need. But I'm optimistic that we can get that done. And if that's possible, then the message that Joe Biden will be able to deliver in Glasgow is the United States is back, the United States is at the table, the United States is serious, and we're partnering with Europe, and we're not going to any longer just turn a blind eye to what's going on in China or other countries in terms of their pollution, but then their exploitation of their workforce, the Uyghurs or others, to manufacture goods that then undercut the global market. We're going to be very, very, very purposeful, and that this is our moment. Glasgow is the turning point. And I really do believe that if we can pass this legislation, and I think we can, then we're going to see a dramatic difference by the beginning of next year. And every utility in the United States, every automotive firm here, but across the world will say, that's the new marketplace. We have to adjust our investments and our long-term strategy because the world is not going back to 2020 ever again with Donald Trump in the White House. So,
Senator, we have Nigel Topping and Mr. Muniz, who are UN champions for COP21, coming up in a couple of hours later today. What questions should we ask them, or what would be your message for them?
Well, I think I would ask him, do they support border adjustment taxes imposed upon countries that are using lower environmental standards as a competitive advantage? Would they support that? Should the United States have a plan to produce its own materials for solar, for wind, for all electric vehicles here in the United States or in other countries who are allies, rather than becoming more and more and more dependent upon China and other countries who are unreliable? What should that plan be? But from my perspective, this is the turning point. We've learned a great lesson through the pandemic. We can see, for example, how dependent we were on China for our medicines during
COVID,
that crisis. And we should just extrapolate that out to look at the clean energy sector, looking at where we get our materials from right now, and have a plan. And if we do it, and that's what I would, I guess, ask your experts to comment upon, what could that then mean in terms of the balance of power across the planet economically going forward as well?
And what would you tell investors right now? There is no carbon tax. You have, I think, you've been thinking about that for a while. We've been talking about that. I think in Europe, they've had that as an important topic. When we talk to some interestingly more sophisticated investors, they already include whether it's a $35, $41 per ton of implicit tax when they make their investments. Because if you're an insurance company, you're trying to risk mitigate. You're trying to make sure whatever you're investing today that could have a 10-year or 20-year life is going to be around. Mm-hmm. And so some investors are doing that. The law is not there, and it's not really a general practice among many investors. Do you think the law will change, or this will be something that economists will learn to do at school, and then they'll come out and not talk about externalities that can't be valued, and it will be politicians, business people, investors, or this young movement that you talked about that will change so that we do include it as an explicit cost?
Well, obviously the Waxman-Markey bill
exactly
that passed the House of Representatives in 2009, it was a carbon tax, a cap and trade system, yes. And it was pricing carbon throughout the entire United States economy. The approach which is being used here so far is different. It's creating more or less incentives, whether it be a climate bank, tax incentives. We'll have most likely the Biden administration reimposing the California level automotive efficiency standards as well, back up to 5% per year, so that we just continue to go through 45, 50, 55, 60, 65 miles per gallon standards. So those standards will be there, and in a way, that price is then built into the vehicle. Right? It's just a price, the cost of doing business. So there's no explicit carbon tax which is included right now, with the exception of a border tax that would be imposed. And maybe it'll come up, but I think it would only be used in a targeted way to an area that otherwise could not be dealt with in any other way. But I don't think it would be, broad-based across the board.
You have been so early compared to anyone I know, anyone we've read about, in thinking about climate finance. And climate potential disaster. What got you when you started thinking about this 36 years ago plus?
What started me on this issue? Well, my father was a milkman. We lived in a blue-collar neighborhood in Malden, Massachusetts, which is a city about 4 miles north of Boston. And my family had gotten off the boat from Ireland, but my grandmother died. They had 5 daughters. My mother was the second oldest, so she had to raise the 3 younger sisters. So she was still 2 blocks from where they got off the boat from Ireland, and that's where I grew up. In the Malden River was where all the chemical companies, all the rubber companies, they were right there, 3 blocks from my house. And my mother, when I was 10 years old, said, "Eddie, whatever you do not swim in the Malden River." And obviously the Malden River was black with kind of a pre-Jimi Hendrix purple haze that was over it. And when your mother says, "Don't swim in the Malden River," you know you're not Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn on the Mississippi. And so that is what first drove my attention to this issue. And then over the years, it's evolved. Obviously, I didn't understand pollution taxes or border adjustment taxes. But my goal was to make sure that the Maldens of America had the same kind of environment as the Newtons and Brooklines, so that there was an equality of access to good, clean air, water, and land. And so I've been working on it throughout my entire career, and I think we're on the cusp of the big victory this year. We can deliver for every family in America and do it on an equitable basis.
I'm also, like you, very optimistic, but at the same time, this is the chance we have right now. So talking again to people who are, whether they're sitting in foundations, whether they're sitting in academia, whether they're sitting allocating assets, what would be your one message as we let you go to get these things done for us, for our country?
Yeah, we have a big vote today. I would say keep up the pressure. Keep working. Keep explaining how this is the job creation opportunity of a generation, that this would be the lost opportunity of a generation. This would be ceding an entire industry to China unnecessarily because the United States did not have a plan. And the big losers would be the workers in the United States who would not have these jobs. When we moved on the tech sector, we branded it, you know, Google, eBay, Amazon, Hulu, YouTube, but in Fortune magazine and Forbes, the headline was USA #1. Well, that has to be our goal here in the clean energy sector. USA #1, that we have a plan and we need everyone explaining the economic benefits to our country, the wealth generation, the technology innovation that will be unleashed if we do this right.
Well, on that note, I have to thank you for being so generous with your time this morning.
I love being with you.
And good luck with all of this. And we very much appreciate what you're doing for our country and for the world.
Thank you. And
thank you, Senator.
And so everyone out there, do your work. Keep up the pressure for the next month, and we will get this job done. Thank you, Afsaneh.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Love being with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.